Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Forest Stewardship Workshop series. Well, actually the Forest Stewardship Workshop special series. Tonight's program is about the Forest Legacy Program, and we have several guest speakers tonight. And I will go ahead and ask, please, participants, if you have any questions for our speakers, to please put your comments in the chat box. And speakers, I will politely interrupt and bring those questions up in a timely manner. We also have Q&A at the end. So with that, I'll start with Kevin. Kevin, I made you a co-host. You can go ahead and log in and please give us an introduction of yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Kevin Kiniery. I'm the CAL FIRE Forest Legacy Program Coordinator. I'm pretty new to this position, but not new to CAL FIRE, so but still getting up to speed on this program, and I'm excited to share it with you tonight. So I'm going to try to share my screen. Okay, can you see the full page of the presentation?
No.
No. Okay.
Now we can.
Okay, great. So tonight I'll be talking about how the Forest Legacy Program functions and how it can benefit private forest landowners. So my goals for tonight are to explain the purpose of the Forest Legacy Program, briefly describe how the Forest Legacy Program functions, and describe how the Forest Legacy Program can benefit private forest landowners. So the purpose of the Forest Legacy Program is to protect environmentally important forest land threatened with conversion to non-forest uses. And protection of California's forests through this program ensures forests continue to provide such benefits as sustainable timber production, wildlife habitat, recreation opportunities, watershed protection, and open space. And intact forests also contribute significantly to the storage of and sequestration of carbon. So for a visual example, you can take a look at the image to the right. This is a private forest land that was conserved through the California forest land. So the yellow polygon is a forest tract that conservation easement was placed on it. And you can see how there's a developed community just adjacent to this forest land. So there was a potential threat to a non-forest use, a conversion to a non-forest use, such as a housing subdivision. So by putting a conservation easement on this property, this ensured this forest land remains forest land in perpetuity. So the main tool that we use in the Forest Legacy Program to conserve forest land is what's called a working forest conservation easement. And working forest conservation easements restrict development and extinguish subdivision rights. And these conservation easements also protect forest values by concentrating on sustainable forest management practices that provide the landowner economic value from the land while encouraging long-term stewardship. So how does the Forest Legacy Program function? Well, there are two main programs that are complementary to each other, with a third program and funding area that's still under development. So the first program area is the California Forest Legacy Program. This program utilizes state funding to purchase fee title to property and to purchase conservation easements. So under this program, a trust organization will hold the interest in the property. So the trust will hold the fee title to property, or in most cases, the land trust will hold the conservation easement interest while the landowner retains ownership of the property. And this program gains a lot of interest because some landowners and land trust organizations prefer that the land trust holds the interest in the property. And under this program, the land trust organization is responsible for annual monitoring and enforcing the terms of the easement. The second program area is the Federal Forest Legacy Program. And this is a program administered by the United States Forest Service in cooperation with CAL FIRE. And under this program, federal funding is granted to CAL FIRE to purchase fee title to property and to purchase conservation easements. And there is a difference between this program compared to the state program. This program requires the state, or CAL FIRE in this case, to hold the interest in the property. So the state needs to hold the fee title to property, but in most cases, the state will hold the conservation interest in the property while the landowner retains ownership of the property. And under this program, the state, or CAL FIRE, is responsible for annual monitoring and enforcing the terms of the easement. The third program area or funding area is the Inflation Reduction Act funding for forest land conservation. And this is still in development, but it's federal funding administered by the U.S. Forest Service. And there are a few funding project criteria that will be released under this funding source. And first are the Keystone Large Landscape Projects. And this is intended for large scale, high impact and exceptional public benefit projects. The second category, which may be of interest to this audience, is the strategic small tracts and family forest projects. And these are intended for strategic inholdings and smaller family forests that are adjacent to already protected lands. And the third funding category under this funding source is the tribal partnerships projects. And this is where the state partners with tribes to conserve forest land that has high benefit and value to tribes. So this is still under development, and more information about this Inflation Reduction Act funding and scoring criteria and application process and deadlines will be released by the Forest Service in the coming months. So now you have a brief overview of the purpose and function of the Forest Legacy Program. How can the Forest Legacy Program benefit you as a private forest landowner? So there are many benefits, from conservation values on your property, to protection of ecological values on your land, to providing landowners with economic value from the sale of a conservation easement and from potential reduced taxes. So first, by providing economic incentives through funding conservation easements, the Forest Legacy Program encourages landowners to keep their forests as forests while allowing for traditional forest uses such as sustainable forest management, hunting, grazing, recreation, wildlife habitat conservation, watershed protection, and open space conservation. So many forest landowners already manage their property and forest land for economic value through things such as timber harvesting and grazing. Well, the Forest Legacy Program allows landowners to continue to sustainably manage their forest land while also getting economic benefits from restricting development and extinguishing subdivision rights through the sale of a conservation easement. Another benefit is permanent conservation. So many landowners value their land and how it is and want to see it remain as is into the future. So by putting a working forest conservation easement on that property, it ensures the landowner's conservation values are maintained in perpetuity, even when the land changes ownership. Third, there are potential economic benefits. And as a caveat, I'm not an expert on these economic benefits, but there were some questions raised before this webinar about economic benefits and about potential tax benefits. So I just wanted to give a general overview. So there are potential estate tax benefits. By restricting development and extinguishing subdivision rights on your property, this may lower the market value of your property, which in turn can potentially lower estate taxes when you pass your land on to the next generation. There are also potential property tax benefits through the same process. By lowering the market value on your property, this can potentially lower your property taxes. And third, there's potential state and federal tax benefits. Through conservation easement transactions, some landowners choose to donate a portion of the value through what's called a bargain sale. And donations can may be considered charitable donations, which can in turn potentially lower your federal and state income taxes. So obviously, if you're interested in the conservation easement, please seek advice from appropriate financial, tax, and legal advisors regarding these potential benefits and whether they may or may not benefit you. So that concludes my talk tonight. If you would like more information, please visit the CAL FIRE and U.S. Forest Service Legacy websites. I encourage you to log on to CAL FIRE's Forest Legacy website and sign up for email updates. We'll release information through email notifications when grant solicitation periods are open. So if you want to stay up to date, sign up for those. And if you have additional questions, you can reach out to me directly. I'm the primary contact for the Forest Legacy program. My contact information's on the slide here. And if you need it, it's also on the Forest Legacy website. So thanks for your time and attention.
Thank you, Kevin. So there was a question, John did answer it, but I'm going to go ahead and read it out for everyone. So if a property is under the Williamson Act, is it still eligible for a conservation easement?
Yes, it is. And we have examples of putting conservation easements with Williamson Act properties.
Thank you, Kevin. Any other questions for Kevin? All right, well, as we continue on, if you have any questions for Kevin, please go ahead and put them in the chat. And I'm going to turn this over to Dana. And Dana, you have co-host ability, and why don't you introduce yourself, please?
Great. Thank you so much, Kim. And thank you, Kevin, for that introductory presentation. So I will try not to repeat a lot of it because you definitely were very inclusive of a lot of information there. So I will go ahead and share my presentation. And so I'm Dana Walsh. I am the program manager with the U.S. Forest Service for our land conservation, forest conservation programs. And so my programs work through CAL FIRE. They're a key contact to be working with on these programs. And the two programs I'm going to talk to you tonight about are the Community Forests Program and the Forest Legacy Program that is federally funded. There are some similarities between the two and some stark differences between the two. And so let's see if this allows me, if I pick the right one. Okay, there we go. So again, community forest and open space is one of our two land conservation programs, forest conservation programs, and Forest Legacy is the other one through federal funding. So community forests is definitely kind of a left field swing from some of the information that Kevin was giving. So I just briefly want to make you all aware of this program. It's similar to Legacy in some ways, but some key differences. So this program may be applicable to some of you. Some of you may not be interested in it very much for your own lands, but it's a good program to be aware of in a suite of different forest conservation opportunities. So community forest program.
Dana, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you just a moment. Can you put it on presenter mode?
Oh, is it not on presenter mode? Yes, of course. Thank you. I may have shared the wrong version. It gave me like 3 versions to pick from. So let's see if it, either that or I may just have to put it in presenter mode. Okay, I may have to just do this. Sorry, I am operating on a single screen tonight, which is much more challenging than my normal one.
Slideshow.
Down on the bottom right-hand side.
I was going to say I've got all this stuff in my way.
There it is.
There we go. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Dana.
Okay, now unfortunately it takes away my notes, but I will still just try and go with what I'm saying. So community forest open space program is grants for acquiring private forest lands threatened by conversion to non-forest uses. Similar to Forest Legacy, it provides economic benefits here to communities. It provides environmental benefits, educational benefits, forest management demonstration benefits, as well as recreation benefits. It's a much smaller program than Forest Legacy. The Federal Forest Legacy Program projects currently under our current program, not the new Inflation Reduction Act program that Kevin briefly gave some information about, but our current Forest Legacy program can go up to $20 million in federal funding, whereas the community forest program is a $600,000. This program is solely applicable to fee title acquisition. Unlike Forest Legacy, conservation easements are not allowed. And these properties, rather than being owned by the forestry agency for the state here, CAL FIRE, they can be owned by local governments, tribal governments, nonprofit entities, so much wider suite of potential landowners, similar to the California Forest Legacy program. The program pays up to 50% of the project costs and then requires an equal match. The key thing about these is public access is required. It's not unfettered public access. There are definitely bounds with limitations for protection of resources and other considerations, but public access is a key element to these. And lands acquired through the program are managed for community forest benefits rather than just general forest benefits. Now, similar to Forest Legacy, the lands are those that are threatened to conversion for non-forest uses. So we're really trying to keep forest land as forested. These lands can't already be in the property of the United States. And so they need to be held by a private entity in title. So this is not a program to be able to get other federal land into a community forest. The elements around community benefits are really highlighted through this program. And so it's really when communities are identifying a need for a piece of property to be able to integrate it into their community benefits, as well as building on existing community forests, parks, resources that exist out there. And so that can be marrying a suite of the federal CAL FIRE Forest Legacy programs along with other land conservation programs. These properties have to be at least 5 acres in size and at least 75% forested. And this is just kind of an example of a recent forest community forest acquisition proposal we had. So here you can see that there is a lot of neighborhood, a lot of housing surrounding a couple of larger forested parcels within a community. And on the bottom portion, that is already community park. So those are already lands that are accessible to the community. The parcels in the upper left-hand side are currently slated for development, but the community would really like to, instead of having this private parcel sold off and developed into several additional houses, would like to be able to add it to the park system, be able to establish a community forest, and be able to establish additional trails, link up the other parcels. So if you have blocks of forest land that are within communities, it's good to know about this program and be talking to land conservation organizations, county organizations, city organizations, and see if there's a potential for them to pursue purchasing forest land to keep it forested. Or if you're in one of the situations where you're trying to work with neighboring landowners or other conservation to build a block of conserved forest land, this can be a good program to add to that suite. And currently, California has one community forest example. So we've had some really great recent applications that have come in. And so we're really hoping that our community forest opportunities continue to grow in the state. The current community forest, for those of you who are familiar with the Arcata area, the Arcata Community Forest is actually a compilation of several different programs. And so the community there itself had some forest land. The university has some land. The Cal Fire Forest Legacy Program has paid for some acquisition there. The Federal Forest Legacy Program has contributed to some pieces there. And then the Community Forest and Open Space Program was also utilized to purchase an inholding in there. And so that one to me is just this phenomenal example of being able to piece together a bunch of different properties. The one that was purchased through the Community Forest Program had been in private ownership. It could have been developed into houses. And so this just allowed for that more cohesive forest management. So the process, usually a request for proposals is published in September and funding is awarded later that same fiscal year. And so it's a very quick process in terms of moving through the application period and being able to get funding into the hands of partners to be able to move forward on that acquisition. It's really good to know what the projects are well before kind of the official request for proposals comes out. So this is our ideal timeline that I'm presenting on the screen. This past year, the request for proposals was issued in March and was due a couple of weeks later. So it can be a really crunched timeline depending on how releases are going in a specific year. And so I'm going to pause there and see if there was any questions on community forests before I move into forest legacy from the federal standpoint.
Nothing on the community forest program.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to keep that one really briefly because it may not be as applicable to some of you as the Federal Forest Legacy Program or the Cal Fire Forest Legacy Program. So our Federal Forest Legacy Program was instituted in 1990, and it's really meant to conserve these really important forest areas in the country that are threatened to conversion. And so focusing in on scenic values, cultural values, fish, wildlife, recreation resources, riparian areas, ecological values, and making sure that we're not losing some of these key forest lands as a society, because we know private forest land provides really key, really important benefits to the entire population. So it's one of our conservation program tools. Landowners can participate by selling their property outright to the state or selling conservation easements to the state, but it is a nationally competitive process. So you don't just go to CAL FIRE and say, hey, buy this. You've got to go through this, of course, process and be selected. And there's all of these, of course, bureaucratic steps that go into this. But as Kevin said, there's two different pathways here. There's one that's a conservation easement that the private landowner continues to hold title to their land. There's a lot of things you can still do on your land. You can have housing envelopes and still live on your land. But realistically, it's meant to conserve that forest element as working forest in perpetuity instead of having it developed into subdivisions, houses, agriculture, some other non-forest use. There's also a fee simple acquisition. So if you wanted to sell your property and the state wanted to acquire that piece, the state could hold total ownership to that piece. We've rarely seen that one moving forward in California at this point. And so for the conservation easements, as I was saying, landowners have long-term responsibility and long-term access to managing their lands. You do have to have a multiple resource management plan. That is one of the expectations. And so California, as we all know, has very stringent forest practices. And so we just really encourage, sustainable long-term ecological management. Be simple, then the state has that long-term responsibility. And so what makes a what makes a project eligible? There's some key criteria. So the state itself comes out with a forest action plan where they identify the needs for the forest legacy program within their state, of course, aligned with the federal program itself. and they designate areas that they're looking at for forest legacy areas. So California has that assessment of needs. It has been recently updated with some prioritization metrics in it, but that's really what we're looking at from a federal standpoint to make sure that our program is aligning with the states. From there, the individual properties, it has to be private forest land. That can either be industrial, it can be held by a large industrial forest landowner, or it can be non-industrial parcels. Has to be at least 75% forested. In forest legacy, there is some elements of being able to restore forested areas. If, say, you've got some areas that are deforested, you're just slightly below that 75%. Forested, also important to mention that that definition is at least 10% tree canopy cover. It can be oak, it can be conifer. It's not one specific thing, but at least 75% of the property needs to be forested or have substantial plans to become at least 75% forested in the short term. So there needs to be a cost share of at least 25%, so non-federal match. It can't be another federal grant. Landowner has to be willing. This is not an eminent domain process. It is a willing landowner who wants to sell some vested interest in their property. It is not a mandatory program by any means. It has to be within a forest legacy area, and as I've said, it has to have a multiple resource management plan if it is being held by the private entity rather than the state. And so these projects, as I said, they're evaluated nationally. So the landowner, the land trust, the property owner applies through CAL FIRE with their project, and CAL FIRE is who the Forest Service is working with on what projects they want to bring forward. So you may have, 10, 15 projects come into the state, and the state's looking, saying, okay, which 3 projects really fit with our priorities this year? And then they're looking at the same elements, of course, but on the national level, we're evaluating based on the importance of the property nationally. It could be really important within the state, but it's got to meet the national criteria because we're judging it against 50 other states and several of the territories. And so endangered species habitat, unique forest communities are very, very critical. Scenic value, cultural value, water supply. Public access is not a mandate on this program. The applications, public access is one of the elements that are weighted and scored for the projects, but it's no means mandatory, and a property does not have to have all of these elements of importance to be able to successfully get through the federal legacy program. Another element that we rank and score on is the threat of development. So are there already protections on the property? What is the landowner's circumstances? What are the adjacent land uses? If all of the neighboring parcels are selling and being developed into housing subdivisions, and this is happening really quickly, it's going to obviously be a much higher threat rating than if it's out in the forest and you don't currently have development going on around it. Again, we don't say, okay, if there's a really low threat, then it's nothing that we want to conserve, because there could be a future threat and it could be a really strategic, really important parcel to move forward on. Strategic means how does it tie in with other state, national, local strategies, initiatives for conservation of forest lands. This is the third element that things are ranked and scored on. How does it connect in with other protected lands? Is it part of an important habitat corridor that goes through an area? And then the final element is how ready is the project to move forward? So has there been an appraisal? Do we know if there's limitations on the title? Has there been discussions about what a conservation easement could look at? So this is how we evaluate projects at the national scale. So if you're looking at developing a proposal for this, CAL FIRE has their application period currently open for the state applications. They've got obviously their own funding that they'll talk a lot more about, but we've also got the federal application period that kind of coincides with them gathering which projects they're going to want to move forward. So you guys have their website. In August, September, there is a committee within the state that evaluates and ranks and recommends ranking of these proposals for CAL FIRE to move forward. In November, these are evaluated. So this is a much slower process. It's a multi-year process. So projects that go in this year will go through a ranking and scoring evaluation in November. In 2024, usually the spring, around March, the president's funding list will come out. And then if everything goes well and Congress passes a budget for 2025, then that's when a grant would go forward for anything that's successfully picked this year. So it really isn't for properties that are planning on selling within the next year or two. It's really landowners that are looking at having, several years on their property that they want to work through one of these opportunities. So Kevin also briefly mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act Forest Legacy projects. So our current Forest Legacy Standard program is funded through the Land and Water Conservation Fund. It's mandated by Congress to be funded annually. There can be some variations in funding there on where if funding goes to different land management agencies, but we do have annual funding that goes through that. This is a new opportunity that was passed as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. And in Forest Legacy, there is a block of about $700 million nationally to enhance our program with some specific criteria around Inflation Reduction Act over the next few years. And so these are being broken out into those components that Kevin had mentioned. So large landscapes, if projects are larger than that $20 million cap that I had mentioned earlier, they have to be broken into several phases and several pieces. And so with this large landscape conservation opportunity, what we're looking at is where are these really key pieces in the landscape that rather than phasing over multiple years, we may be able to just get those done in a single year and not risk losing future phases because people lose interest or things come up that then put future phases into a precarious state. We also know that there's some small strategic inholdings that just don't rank very high in our national standard process because they're small. It's hard to tell kind of the importance and strategic nature of just a very small tract. So this is going to give us an opportunity to focus on some of those. And then this tribal partnership conservation piece where the states are working with the tribes to conserve lands that are really important to them is this other really unique opportunity here. So we're being told, expecting that we're going to be able to release that request for proposals in June with the first due date in December. And then there's going to be opportunities within the next few years to continue to build on these projects and processes. This funding expires 10 years from initiation. So I think we've got about 9 years left on this funding before it disappears. So all of the projects have to be completely done within that period of time. And in California, the majority of forest legacy projects at this point have been along the North Coast, obviously with the redwoods and water issues out there and just some really key landscape species. Those have been just wonderful projects to be able to move forward for. We are seeing more hop on board in the Trinities, but there's a lot of opportunities across the state that this program has the ability to move into and do some really great work. As of last summer, we were at well over 100,000 acres and we'll continue to see this program grow in California. So here is my contact information. You're welcome to reach out to me with any questions. And we're definitely here to help support you as you're thinking of projects or as you're putting projects together. The state also, of course, is a wonderful resource. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dana. We do have a couple of questions. And actually, Gabrielle, I'm hoping you'll unmute yourself and ask your question because I want to make sure we're referring to specifically what you're asking.
Yeah, one of your whoops. Let's see. One of your slides mentioned being within a forest legacy area. I just wanted to know what that was. Sorry about that.
Oh, all great. So the state designates what it identifies as areas that it sees this program being a good fit for. So every 5 years, they do a forest action plan and they identify areas where the forest legacy program is aligning with their interests through what's called an assessment of needs. And so the state has that all mapped. They have all the information available, but it's up to the state on where those areas are. and pretty much in California, it's a lot of the forested land. There's not much that I've seen for large gaps in the California forests that could participate in this program.
Thanks, Dana. There was also another question. Earlier, one of the maps that was shown shows projects heavily weighted in the Pacific Northwest. Probably more the community forest program. Is that a function of grant writing talent or?
So I think it's been a function of interest and probably knowledge and accessibility to the program. So a lot of the projects that come in, go through different land trusts. They come into CAL FIRE. We work a lot with our land trust partners to bring forward projects and move projects through the proposal stage, and then also move through some of the acquisition processes. And, like I said, the redwoods, the endangered species, the water aspects of those landscapes is obviously a very compelling story, but we have a lot of other compelling stories in California also. And it may be that just the program wasn't being outreached enough in other areas. I haven't seen much for other areas bringing in large amounts of projects. So I think there is a potential lack of some knowledge on the program also, which is why I greatly appreciate Kim and others, putting together webinars like this so that we can get more information out there on these programs.
Thanks, Dana. Any other questions for Dana? All right, then before I turn it over to John, Kevin, there was a question in the chat box for you regarding the Forest Legacy Program. Properties as small as what size can be eligible for the Forest Legacy Program?
So there isn't a defined limitation on size, but we are looking for properties that have a threat to conversion to a non-forest use, have a strategic value in the larger landscape, and have importance to certain values such as ecological, habitat, watershed, water supply, and other ecological and cultural values. So a property that, it's 160 acres may, and these are the criteria we're scoring projects on. So a property that's 160 acres may score low compared to a property that's several thousand acres and can really hit on those scoring criteria. So if you would like, you can reach out to me and we can discuss your property, further and see if there's potential there. But and I'm also interested in the Inflation Reduction Act projects for small strategic forests and family forests that are coming out that will give some additional opportunities to smaller landowners. So.
Thanks, Kevin. All right, I'm going to go to John now to talk about the solicitation process. John, can you introduce yourself? You're muted, John.
Sorry about that. Good evening. I'm John Ramaley. I'm the Forester 3 Deputy and the Deputy Chief for Forestry Assistance under Stu McMorrow and the Wildflower Resilience Program. Kevin Kiniery works for me. And tonight I'm going to be going over our Forest Legacy Program, our solicitation program process that's upcoming. So I'm going to try to share my screen. Sure. Can you see that?
No,
Okay. What do you see?
I still see the Brady Bunch screen with everybody's pictures and names.
Good. Oh, sorry about that. Okay. There. You see that?
Yes.
Good. So again, Deputy Chief Forestry Assistance in the Wildflower Resilience Program. And we can have a solicitation that's coming up. As Dana and Kevin recently mentioned, June 15th for the federal one. And we are hoping to release our state one also in June. We are working on our grant guidelines, and we are building our application into our easements program, which I'll get into in just a second. So we have our own separate process between the federal program that Dana just described and the California state program. So my goals are to explain both of these. So the first one is the California Forest Legacy Program, the upcoming one. So this is going to be a two-step process, unlike if people had ever engaged in their previous ones. We are going to have a pre-application process. I borrowed heavily from the Wildlife Conservation Board, excuse me, and then obviously edited for our program. What we will do is look at these pre-applications and determine whether or not projects meet our values. Those values will be described in our upcoming grant guidelines. Also, as Kevin described, whether or not if it's just outside of the forest legacy area that Dana described, or it's just a really small property. We have people who might call us and say, I have an acre to donate or something like that. So we'll go through a screening on those. After we go through that screening, we'll review those, we'll score those, we'll rank those. Those ones that rank the highest, they will then be invited to submit their application their full application via easements, which I'll get into. And our pre-application, it includes basic elements. So you're going to provide the a description of the importance, threat, the criteria that Dana and Kevin just described, readiness, really brief, landowner name, other contact, and important criteria as far as wildlife and things like that. And also, this application is going to include, and you'll see this through our grant guidelines, it's going to say current, and it has it in bold and in caps. That means for acquisition projects that people are ready to go with right now. Future means that we are going to be taking funding. The federal funding has increased this year for our forest legacy administration costs. And we're going to take this federal funding, and we may even supplement it with some of our state funding. And this is for project development. This will affect trust organizations more, but this is for people who wanted to work with landowners such as yourself and start getting some of these due diligence items together so that they can. So this is going to benefit the small landowner, and it's going to benefit these organizations as well, because they can. Otherwise, when you get a trust organization, because in CAL FIRE, when we do our state program, we won't hold the easement. They have to put out a lot of money to do some of the due diligence items. So they have risk involved. And so this actually helps them be successful in developing projects that they can submit for ranking. And it doesn't even have to be for our Forest Legacy program. It could be for the Wildlife Conservation Board or one of the other programs. So this is a unique element for this year's solicitation. We will, prior to the submission of the full application, we will be requiring a field visit. At that point, the project applicants can talk about their project, show us the highlights, just give us an overview of the project. So the applicant will, it's up to them to schedule the field visit with us. So the e-service is new. We have a new program that we rolled out in 2022. And so all applications will be submitted online through our e-service program. And this will be through the applicant. So usually it won't be the landowner themselves entering this stuff in the online. It'll be the applicant, usually the organization, Save the Redwoods League or not to mention, I'm sorry to mention any particular conservation group out. Lauren's on next with Sierra Foothill Conservancy, really great organization. There's a lot of them, and they will usually be the organization that will be submitting the application. Those will then be reviewed and scored by CAL FIRE against our grant selection criteria. And there'll be 100 points. This will be very similar to the federal program: importance, threat, strategic value, readiness, this active forest management, public access, very similar. We're also talking about if there is a bargain sale or donated matching funds, and then project completeness. This is kind of a readiness item, a little bit different light. And you have to read the grant guidelines for that. And then we will notify them by email if they have or not been selected. I think that's actually auto-generated from our eCivils program. So the other program, which is the program that Dana just talked about, is our Federal Forest Legacy Program. Those applications are due June 15th, 2023. Kevin will be your main contact for that. These will be submitted online through the Federal Forest Legacy Information System, or FLIS. And this is the secure website that all applicants have to use. Most organizations that have applied are, again, trust organizations. Those that they know FLIS. But and if you don't know FLIS, it's not a complicated program. So and then you'll work with Kevin. That's what we're here to do, is to help you get your project into the system. So if you have an issue, please contact us. Then we will, we have our own state forest stewardship coordinating committee. They will be the ones on the federal program that will rank and score these projects with us. And so we are a part of the State Forest Stewardship Coordinating Committee, and that we need that committee, in fact, to actually be part of some of the federal funding that we receive. And they are a really good committee of a group of people who've actually been involved and have scored these projects annually. So the top 3 applicants were allowed to submit only 3, and a total of $20 million. These then go to the Western Regional Selection Panel, and then those are considered, and necessary revisions to the applicants are made. So this then gets kicked back. So it's kind of an iterative process. And then all the top 3 applicants, because what you're doing is you're cleaning up your application and you're now going to the national level. So Dana is here to help us. We're here to help you. This then goes to the regional level. Everybody's here to help you get those 3 projects submitted and scored high. And then they reach the president's budget list. It seems to be that they fund approximately $95 million a year in projects. And then I think it's the top 10 usually get funded. So when we had one this year that did get funded, it is a very lengthy process because it's complicated. Because what we are doing is purchasing a portion of your property, right? So it's an actual real estate transaction where we now will own a portion of, that one layer of the onion, is my supervisor likes to say. And so it takes some time, and we have legal counsel, and but it's worth it. I've met people that have been in business that have had easements on their own property, and it really can help people out. So if you're interested in this, please look at both the federal program. They have an excellent website. They have excellent guidelines. Look at our website. The solicitation will be coming out very soon. And thank you all for attending.
Great, thank you, John. All right, any questions for John? All right, we will move on then to Lauren. Lauren, you can unmute yourself and introduce yourself. And John, if you could stop sharing your screen, that would be great.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Miller, Conservation Director with Sierra Foothill Conservancy, a local nonprofit land trust serving Madera, Mariposa, Fresno, and Eastern Merced counties. And I'm here tonight to share a little bit about the land trust perspective and also about how landowners can work with and find a land trust and what our role in this process is. Some of the previous presenters did a great job of sharing that role, and I wanted to just give a few more resources to the landowners on the phone tonight about how they can find a local land trust that might serve their area. So I don't know if I can get some controls to share, to be able to share my screen so I can share those websites. And while we wait for that, I just want to share with the group, this is our first year actually being a land trust that is managing a grant award from CAL FIRE's state forest legacy program. And we actually have a funded project that we're working on. And so I'm a newbie to this in terms of in the land trust seat, being the manager of this. And I'm excited to be working with CAL FIRE and with our landowner. And our property that we're proposing to conserve is actually a little bit different. And it's going to be, it's more of a mixed oak woodland with some conifer, and primarily the land use is grazing. But all of those are compatible with CAL FIRE's program. And it's a good point to bring up that I think the eligibility is, I think when people think about this, they do typically think conifer only, but CAL FIRE's definition of forest land does include oak woodland and chaparral and other hardwood forest. So definitely, don't think that just because you're not in a solid conifer forest area that this program isn't something that can work for you. Check with the CAL FIRE staff, check with your local land trust, and they can help you vet your property and see whether it's worth pursuing a pre-application. The other thing that I wanted to get into a little bit is if you are in as a landowner, I think it's a really great tool. Conservation easements are a wonderful way to continue to retain and own your property and be able to manage the property in the way that you have in the past while preventing future development, fragmentation, subdivision, mining, things like that aren't compatible. And it's a wonderful tool also because it'll allow you to continue, you can layer on top of it things like CFIP from CAL FIRE, NRCS's EQIP program. All of those types of programs are still compatible and can help you with the management of the property. Also partnering with your land trust, who can sometimes bring you, in our instance, have been able to procure grant funds available to us that are not available to regular landowners themselves.
I gave you co-host permission, Lauren, so whenever you're ready.
Great. I will share my screen. Window. So the first one I wanted to share with you guys, can you see it? First of all, you should be seeing the California Council of Land Trusts.
Yes, we see that.
So for landowners on the phone, I'm going to copy paste this into the chat on the Zoom after this, after my presentation. But you can navigate to, you can just type CCLT in the Google search bar and navigate through to the map of California Land Trust, and you can choose your county this way. So for instance, if I choose Fresno, it highlights the county, and then it provides for me the website link to all of the land trusts that serve that county. So that's a great way to navigate to find a land trust for yourself. Or if you want to go the opposite way and you know your land trust and you want to see what it serves, for instance, here's Bear Yuba. This shows you that they serve multiple counties. If I navigate down to Sempervirens Fund, which is the Save the Redwoods League, they actually cover the whole state. So it's Sierra Foothill Conservancy, we cover like our little regions a little bit off. So it's good to check in with the land trust and check in, see exactly what they cover in your region. And then the other thing I wanted to share is also the National Land Trust Alliance website. You can also enter information here to find a land trust. This Land Trust Alliance is a national organization that kind of governs land trusts, and they also do land trust accreditation, and a little over 500 land trusts in the nation are accredited, including our own. And this is a great website with a lot of resources for landowners. And I'm going to navigate over to the next tab, which gets into what Kevin shared earlier about potential. Always got to use the word potential because I'm not your legal person, but it's a great website to look at potential income tax incentives, estate tax incentives. They've got great brochures and documents that you can actually walk into your tax person or your attorney and say, hey, look at this. And then they can use those tools to help navigate your own financial situation and weigh that against these benefits and see what works for you and kind of crunch the numbers on those. So I'll copy paste all three of these links into the chat so that folks can navigate to those. I still use, after 9 years, I still go to the Land Trust Alliance website and download these documents. They also do a really good job of keeping up on what's happening at the federal level as far as changes with the IRS and their rules on tax incentives. So definitely a great resource for that. And then the last thing I kind of wanted to, well, not last, but one of the things I wanted to share was this photo that is of our funded conservation easement that's in process right now. And it is definitely doesn't fit the typical mold of what the historic, I would say, Forest Legacy project looks like.
So Lauren, we're not actually seeing the photo. We're still seeing the web page.
Okay, sorry. Let me try again. I stopped sharing, and so let me share again. There we go. How's that?
There you go.
Okay, great. So let me try again. This is one of the properties we've got funded. And like I was sharing, I think an earlier comment in the chat was, wow, a lot of these are concentrated in the Pacific North. And yes, there's been historically a lot of projects there. And I think it's a big combination of, right, once the word gets spread and once land trusts get used to using a certain type of funding, it kind of goes that trend. And I think after the last couple of years, CAL FIRE has done a really good job of spreading the word about the program and also about the eligibility requirements, and hence more broad participation from folks like ourselves and even California Rangeland Trust and other land trusts who might have in the past not pursued these because they may not have thought we would have been eligible. And here we have this property in the Chowchilla River watershed. And as you can see, it's majority oak woodland. We've got some foothill pine. We do definitely have some conifer forest on the property, but that's not the predominant forest type. And some chaparral, and then obviously incredible water resources. And it's, you know, it's not extremely threatened. I would put it in the medium threat zone, definitely more, you know, rural ranchette development threat, things like that. But, and the main focus as far as commercial use on the, I mean, as far as agricultural use on the property is not forestry for, you know, per se, it's more grazing and cattle. And that's still a compatible use with the program. So I just kind of wanted to share this visual so that folks on the phone who may own land that looks or resembles this property understand that properties like this are potential for this program, and that they should reach out again to their local land trust and to the CAL FIRE folks to vet that. I have a moment if anybody has questions.
Well, I don't see. Oh, go ahead. Okay, well, if you have any questions for Lauren, please go ahead and put them in the chat box. And I would like to turn the screen over now to Dale Silva from Silva Ranch, who actually has participated in the Forest Legacy Program and is here to give us the landowner perspective. Dale, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Dale Silva. Our ranch property is in Sonoma County, about halfway between Healdsburg and the Pacific Ocean. It's 4,400 acres, and we entered into conservation agreement the end of December 2022. So it just happened, and we can barely thank Forest Legacy enough. They were wonderful to work with. They were just absolutely wonderful. They provided most of the funding for it, but I'll get into that later if I may. The ranch has been in our family since 1958. We wanted to conserve it. I wanted to conserve it. I have two daughters. They're good ranch girls, but who knows what's going to happen when I'm gone? You know, when I'm gone, I'm a little bit out of control of things, and we didn't want their husbands saying, you know, it's still the ranch or subdivide the ranch or whatever. We wanted to protect the ranch from that influence. We wanted to preserve the. We wanted permanent conservation. I mentioned this to a timber harvest consultant, and he said, well, you ought to check out a conservation easement. And he put me in touch with the land trust, the Western Rivers Conservancy. And they said, yeah, it looks good to us. Let's see if we can raise some funding for it. See if you sell your easement, what are you going to get for it? So they contacted Forest Legacy, and we Stu Morrow came out. And we had that visit and others, and we the Western Rivers Conservancy submitted the application, and darned if we didn't get some funding. Looking at all the criteria in the earlier presentations, I'm surprised we made it. Thank you, Stu. The next step in this, once we found the land trust and once we got some funding, was to find someone to hold the easement, because Western Rivers didn't, and at the time CAL FIRE didn't. So we connected with the California Rangeland Trust, and they're the ones that hold the easement. Under the terms of the easement, we can do just so much. Of course, we can't subdivide, and that's fine. That's really was our purpose going in. But we're allowed to plant vineyard within limits, but we can plant vineyard, we can graze, we can continue to harvest timber. Under terms of our agreement, we could have a certain number of commercial weddings out there if we wanted to do something like that down the line. My daughter's a veterinarian. She could have her vet practice out there. And we could build up to 3 houses. Truthfully, pretty much everything we could do before we can do now, except subdivide. And again, as I say, that's an important consideration for us. So I'm not sure what to say beyond that, except to say that, oh, I know one thing I want to say. If you're thinking about a conservation easement, I have two bits of advice, if I may. Number one is make sure you're in touch with your family members. You communicate well with the family, with your heirs that have a stake in this, because they will have lots to say about it. And involve them in the process. It's really a collaborative process in that sense. It should be. And the second thing is look for funding other than the Forest Legacy. Forest Legacy, in our conservation easement, provided 90% of the funding, which was, astonishing. But the NRCS was asked and jumped in too for 10% more. And there are other funding groups that will work with Forest Legacy to get you as much as your property, as much as the conservation easement has been appraised for. So, Kim, what should I say beyond that?
Sure. So Dale, can you talk a little bit about any interactions you have with California Range Trust now, and the kind of the communications or the visits, that sort of thing?
Yeah. The Rangeland Trust holds the easement, as I mentioned, and with that comes the right to come out and visit the property periodically, once a year at least, to make sure that we're not violating the terms of the easement. They want to make sure that we're not building a house where we're not supposed to, or damming a creek, or that kind of thing. And we welcome that. In fact, I think it's the first visit's going to be in June. So that'll be fun to show them the fruits of all their labor. We communicate regularly. We get their newsletters. We respond to their emails, and it's all a positive thing. We appreciate their advice and solicit their advice. If we want to do something like put in a road, so we want to put a road to open up a particular area of the ranch, we need to get their permission. There's some things we have to get their permission to do, and some things that we just have to tell them that we're doing. But if you pick the right easement holder and work with Forest Legacy, they, I always say they're for you, not against you. They want you to succeed as a rancher. And so a lot of that stuff, a lot of those kinds of things would likely be approved, whereas they might be if someone else held the easement or someone else provided the funding.
Mm-hmm. And how long of a process was it for you, Dale?
It was 5 years. It took a long time. We had a false start along the way. We were working with a potential easement holder, and it took us a year to find out that it was not a marriage made in heaven. So then we kind of had to start all over again. That's when we found the CRT. We really tried Stu's patience. I'll thank him once again. Thank you for putting up with us, Stu.
Great. Does anyone have any questions for Dale? Right. So I did have a couple of questions that were submitted ahead of time. I just want to make sure. And these are I will open it up to all of our speakers, someone to volunteer to answer the question. So with the requirements of the percentage of requirements for canopy cover, what about if your property has been impacted by wildfire and you no longer have that canopy cover? Can Forest Legacy programs still support those landowners?
So I will answer that from the federal side. For our federal programs, yes, there's a criteria that, of course, 75% of the property has to be forested. If it is not currently forested, then there can be a restoration plan for how it will become forested. So that program is not prohibited by not having that canopy cover. There'd be very few situations, I think, where we'd probably be pursuing those projects, though, where there isn't at least that 10% cover, just because of the other importance factors of the property. It's going to be really hard to showcase the conservation of those values, such as endangered species and water, recreation, if the property is no longer in conditions that it's delivering those currently. Not say that that couldn't exist.
Thank you. And when it was mentioned that if the property is threatened, we did mention land conversion, such as, housing and whatnot. But what else? What about does threatened include threatened by drought and or climate change?
We don't have a criteria. We've had funding in the past, which came from our greenhouse gas reduction fund, but we don't have a specific criteria for climate. That can be a part of the overall discussion of threat to your property. But when you think of climate change as threatening every property to some degree, and so that for us, it's threat that could this property be not, when we say converted or threatened, I mean, can you take your 1,000 acre property and make it into 20 separate parcels? We like to keep that as one big parcel, because we think that is actually something that will combat and help combat climate change, is if people will manage these large parcels. We really encourage active forest management. And our minimum requirement on conservation easements is that you follow the forest practice rules, which is a state law. You have to anyway. That's our minimum. There are people who have want to value and leave more and get paid for leaving more, and those come out also in easements.
And I'll add from the federal program really quickly. Threat is threat to conversion. However, climate impact, drought threats, really, if the property is threatened, then you may not be able to conserve that value into the future. But you have properties that contribute to resilience of the landscape. And so those are really important to capture. So by conserving a forest property, you can really be mitigating threats elsewhere. And where we've got those opportunities, those are really key to highlight and call out and be able to move forward on.
Okay. And there's a question for Dale. So Dale, you mentioned a false start with the first land trust easement holder. What kind of thing, what was are there some reasons that you can?
Well, it turned out that the terms of their easement would have been much more restrictive on us than the rangeland trust or other easement terms. For example, they severely restricted the amount of potential vineyard we could put in. So a CAL FIRE, but this particular group was much less. They wouldn't allow hunting, which was a big thing for my family. They wanted to put further restrictions on our timber harvest plan. Like currently we can't harvest within 50 feet of a blue line stream, and they wanted to make it 200 feet. So there's lots of that kind of stuff that it's kind of embarrassing. It took a year to figure this all out, but when it got down to really looking at it, those are the kinds of things that came to light, and we decided it wasn't for us.
Thank you.
I'll just chime in here briefly as the land trust person. It's so important, Dale, and that you do have to match up with your the mission and the culture of the land trust that you're working with does have to match your vision as a landowner, and being as transparent about that upfront as you can. That's important as a landowner to advocate for yourself and to know to have the family on board and to have a general idea of where your sideboards are that you're comfortable with, and that to make sure that everybody who's going to be signing that document or who has an ownership interest is kind of on the same page before you approach the land trust, and do your research ahead of time so that when you do approach them, you have a united front. And there is a lot of great attorneys out there who specialize in conservation easements, both working for land trusts and for landowners. And although it's expensive, it's definitely helpful, I think, from the landowner perspective for those folks, you know, to at least engage them at some point in the process, and definitely have them review, you know, some of the key documents throughout the process to make sure that, you know, what you're agreeing to is actually what's in writing. And it's a lot of legalese. It is. It's a real property transaction. And by the time you're done, I bet Dale, probably you feel like you got a minor certificate in real estate law. when you're
Yeah,
done.
really.
Yes. Yeah. And then I did see a question in here about value. Curious, I think this is from Gabrielle. Curious how much money giving up development rights would be. So I'll give you the broad answer, and then probably I think CAL FIRE will want to chime in on their specific federal versus state rules. But in general, any time that you're going to place a conservation easement on the property, and if the landowner is seeking either a donative, meaning they want tax deduction, or they're seeking grant funding, meaning they want proceeds for the sale of a conservation easement. There's also a combination of those two, which is called a bargain sale. Anytime any of those three types of transactions are going to occur, the land trust is required to get an appraisal, and the landowner is required to get an appraisal for that meets IRS standards if they're going to seek a tax deduction. So that appraisal is completed by a third-party appraiser, and that appraiser has to follow the rules from the state, and also from the state agency that you're getting funding from, or the federal agency that you're getting funding from. So oftentimes the land trust, like in Dale's case, gets funding from multiple state or federal agencies, and each of those has their own rules, and the appraiser has to have the experience to understand all of those rules and make sure that they are incorporating them into their appraisal. And then they also, of course, have to follow state and federal rules for appraisers. And if it's a donative appraisal, the IRS has specific requirements as well. There are definitely appraisers that are more experienced than others. And that is a very key portion of the process, and can very much delay or derail your transaction timeline if you work with someone that maybe does not have the depth and breadth of experience in this type of appraisal work. But you're basically, what the appraiser is valuing is they're looking at, I always like to give the $5 example. And that is that the appraiser is going to come out and say, okay, if you put your property as is, unencumbered, as is, on the market tomorrow, it might be worth $5. That's what the comparable sales are telling me. And then they're going to read that. This is the other portion that the appraiser has to know, is they have to be able to read through that conservation easement that's proposed and understand what that means and how it will encumber the property, and understand those rights. And then they're going to say, okay, now that they're going to do a hypothetical. And if your property was encumbered with that easement, which means the after value, what would it be? Okay, maybe it's only worth $2 now. So then they're going to say your property was worth $5 with the easement not on it, it's worth $2 with the easement on it. The difference between those two is your conservation easement value. And that's what is going to be either your tax deduction and or the proceeds from your sale of a conservation easement, or the combination of a donative and a proceeds. And I don't want anybody to get attached to my to my $3 value because it runs the gamut. That's what's so hard. It's completely site specific. It's document specific. Two properties right next to each other that are almost exactly the same in every single way could value completely differently due to the restrictiveness of the easement. So it's just typical real estate, right? It's location, location, location. But in this case, you have the added element of the conservation easement and how restrictive it is. The more restrictive it is, the higher value you're going to get. The less restrictive it is, the lower the value is going to be. And then also just comparable sales of encumbered properties. So there's a lot of factors, but I'll let CAL FIRE share their specific rules.
Well, I don't want to get too deep into it. There are different standards between the federal program. They have you have to meet what's called Yellow Book appraisal standards, and they will be the one who basically certifies your appraiser. CAL FIRE does not have that standard. However, it needs to be a real estate appraisal, and it also in both the federal and the state, you have to have, if you are in a timber property and you are, you need to have that, that's an additional value to the property. So you'll need a timber portion of that appraisal will have to be conducted with a registered professional forester. That's the primary criteria. And that's really all, that's all I'll get into for that.
Thanks, John and Lauren. Well, I've got one more question that was sent in. We have time for just one more here, and maybe Dale, maybe you know the answer to this one. Is there any impact on your property taxes, conservation easements?
There would be, except our property is already in the Williamson Act. We've been in the Williamson Act since 1968, wherein the tax break is given to greenbelt ranches, was what the theme was at the time of the idea. So our tax rate under the Williamson Act is less than it would be. But to answer the question, and it was pointed out earlier, there really would be a tax reduction because your property is worth less. As Lauren mentioned, you had the value at the outset, and then take away the right to develop it. Obviously, it's going to be less if somebody wants to buy it because it's that development potential is not there.
Thanks, Dale. Lauren, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, I wanted to share a couple things. There's it's also county for property tax assessment. It's also county dependent. So I think I think there's case law, I'm like 99% sure, that says that if you go to your county assessor and you say, hey, look at my appraised value, you need to reduce my property taxes, they're supposed to do that. However, not all of them are amenable to that. So it depends on, it's definitely it's another thing that like you should look into in the beginning and kind of see maybe what other landowners, and your local land trust is a great resource for this because they will have worked with other landowners in your same county that have either chosen to go through that process or not because of certain circumstances. The other thing to note is if your property has been in the family a really long time and it's maybe very, like if the assessment value is really low, then you maybe don't want to go sniffing around to your county assessor and be like, hey, check out this appraisal, because it might actually increase your value if it's really old. So just something to think about. The other thing is, I know in the beginning, Williamson Act was brought up and how that does, and it is completely compatible. And I just wanted to share that the Sierra Nevada Conservancy at their March board meeting had a wonderful presentation with the California Rangeland Trust, Sierra Foothill Conservancy, and Sarah Clark, who's an attorney for Shoot Mahaley and Weinberger. And that she gives a wonderful presentation on how Williamson Act and conservation easements work together and what the different tax benefits are to the landowner. And I'm going to try to find the link for that and put it in the chat because that meeting should have been recorded. But again, yeah, it definitely, when it comes to tax assessment, property tax assessment, sniff around what your neighbors have done that have encumbered properties.
Thanks, Lauren. All right, I want to thank all of our speakers tonight and the folks on the webinar. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.